Hello, my dear students. We are with 301, and the text that I'd be talking to you about is Dover Beach by Matthew Arnold. Matthew Arnold, as you know, belonged to the Victorian age. And when we think of the Victorian age, 1930s is what we are looking at. When the Industrial Revolution had already happened in England, and immediately to our mind come great writers, great novelists like Dickens and Thackeray. We look at poets like Tennyson and Browning, and of course Arnold. We have great critics. The Victorian age was also an age of doubt. Call it doubt if you will, or maybe you would like to say. There was this constant shifting, the swinging of the pendulum, religious belief and faith on one side, and the scientific discovery on the other. There was this conflict because if scientific discovery had to be believed, maybe what religion was telling us was now being questioned. And there was this period of doubt in which Arnold wrote. Arnold, 1822 to 1888, remember, was a poet, but he was also a great critic. And interestingly, if you look at Arnold as a critic and then look at his writings, look at his poetry, you would probably feel that Arnold will not be too happy with his own poems. Because what he says in his critical writing, in his views on poetry, remember his essay, what he says is very different from what we see in his own poems. His own poems come from the heart. They show us to some extent probably that he is a romantic. Yes, in the Victorian age, with all the doubts, with all the viewpoints of a true Victorian, still probably a romantic at heart. At least as we read Dover Beach, that is what we are likely to believe. Before I go ahead, I must read the poem to you. Dover Beach was published in 1867. There are critics, literary historians, who tell us that the poem was probably written almost 15 years ago. They see in it probably the romantic Arnold, and hence they say it was probably written when he was on a honeymoon. We're not going into that. Let's look at the poem Dover Beach by Matthew Arnold. The sea is calm tonight, the tide is full. The moon lies fair upon the straits. On the French coast the light gleams and is gone. The cliffs of England stand glimmering and vast out in the tranquil bay. Come to the window, sweet is the night air. Only from the long line of spray where the sea meets the moon-blanched land. Listen. You hear the grating roar of pebbles which the waves draw back and fling at their return up the high sand. Begin and cease and then again begin with tremulous cadence slow and bring the eternal note of sadness in. Bring the eternal note of sadness in. Sophocles long ago heard it on the Aegean, and it brought into his mind the turbid ebb and flow of human misery. We find also in the sound a thought, hearing it by this distant northern sea. The sea of faith was once too at the full, and round earth's show lay like the folds of a bright girdle furled. But now I only hear its melancholy, long withdrawing roar, retreating to the breath of the night wind, down the vast edges drear and naked shingles of the world. Our love, let us be true to one another, for the world which seems to be before us like a land of dreams, so various, so beautiful, so new, hath really neither joy, nor love, nor light, nor certitude, nor peace, nor help for pain. And we are here as on a darkling plain, swept with confused alarms of struggle and light, where ignorant armies clash by night. A question that you might have asked yourself again and again, and which teachers also have drawn your attention to probably, is whether when we read a work of art, when we read literature, is it important to know something about the writer, the age in which he lived? My dear students, there are two viewpoints, there are two sides of the coin. But sometimes in a poem like Dover Beach, I would imagine that unless you know something about the Victorian era, about what was happening, what were the major viewpoints of that period, it might be slightly difficult to read a poem, to understand a poem, to appreciate a poem like Dover Beach. Let me first ask you to imagine the distance between the English coast and the French coast. Quickly go back to your geography, think of the map of Europe, think of the islands, the United Kingdom, Great Britain, and think of the main Europe, the continent of Europe. And you know, Dover and Calais is only a few 20 miles away from each other. So here we have Arnold standing on a sea coast where he can probably see in the distance the gleaming lights of France. Maybe of Calais or maybe some other port close by. That's not very important. So he's standing, and the poem begins like something like a nature poem. He's looking out at the sea. And I think many of us love the sea. The sea is calm tonight. The tide is full. The moon lies fair upon the straits. You know, when you hear all this, you think, well, somebody's standing looking out at the sea and he's describing the sea. We are not really prepared for what's going to happen as the poem progresses, because the poem is far more serious than a mere nature poem. So the lights are glimmering on the French coast. They glimmer, you can see them sometimes, and sometimes they are gone. You know, across the sea, maybe it suddenly gets misty, maybe there are too many waves, maybe there's a wind, maybe there's a gale. You can imagine all that. But he's standing at the window, he's watching, and then suddenly he probably turns to look behind. There's someone there, and he calls out to that person, my love. So we imagine, as I told you, that it was probably written earlier when he was on a honeymoon. We're not sure about that. But his wife is there probably with him, and he says, come to the window, my love, and let us see the long line of the sea. If you've been to a beach, which most of you must have been sometime, after all, Gujarat has such a long coastline, you've probably seen how the sea seems never ending. And you've read many poems probably about the sea, about ships at sea, about storms at sea, about the calm sea. You must have read many, many poems. So he asks her to come to the window where they can feel the spray. Not only do you see, you can also hear. Again, if you've stayed on a sea coast in the night and there's no light, you cannot see the sea, but you can still hear the waves. Oh, I love the sound of the waves coming and hitting on the beach and going back. So you can hear that, the grating roar of the pebbles, which the waves bring. They fling on the shore and they go back. Come on, my dear students, a little imagination to imagine this beautiful picture that Arnold is drawing for us. And how is it? It comes and it goes back. It comes and it goes back. Begin and cease, both the coming of the waves as well as the sound of the waves. And what does it remind you of? And this is where the poem takes on a serious note. The poem later is going to be more serious than just a nature poem describing the beauty of the sea. So what does the sound bring to Arnold? The eternal note of sadness. Personification. If you are in a sad mood, the heavens seem to be crying when it rains. And if you are in a happy mood, even the heavens blessed me with rain, is what we say. So personification is indeed important. So the seriousness begins and it continues in the rest of the poem. What does the next verse say? Remember, the neoclassical writers love to go back to the past, to the classical writers. And that's what Arnold does here in the second verse, when he recalls the great writer Sophocles. I am standing here listening to the sound of the sea, Arnold says. But isn't this what Sophocles too did? Maybe the sea was different because that was the Aegean Sea. Remember, Greece we are talking about. So that was the Aegean Sea. But Sophocles too heard the same sound. The sea which went around the earth, because remember there's so much water all over the earth. What did Sophocles hear in the sound of the sea? I don't know. But what I hear now, Arnold says, is only melancholy. The sound of the sea today is not one of joy and happiness and power and strength. No, it is melancholy. It's melancholy. It is sad. And what does it do? As it retreats with the roar, what does it leave behind? It leaves the naked shingles on the shore. Remember seashells, right? If you have an oyster shell and there's a pearl within it, or you have shells, which are like this, it contains something. But what do we have today? Left on the shore for mankind is only naked shingles, the empty shells. Remember, I told you that the Victorian era, the Victorian age in literature, in English literature, was surely a reflection of what people felt then. And what did they feel? Is it that scientific discovery is somehow reducing our faith? Is it that we are being left with a certain hollowness? Because if faith is taken away from us and is not replaced by something else, there is a vacuum within us. We don't know. Remember, Darwin's writings had already become popular, and he was questioning many of the religious tenets of Christianity. And Arnold too was probably worried about this. And therefore he says, today I hear only the melancholy. I see only the naked shingles of the world. There's nothing else for me, he says. But at the same time, he says, at least we have each other. At least we have each other. In those times, the sea of faith was full. In the times of Sophocles, it was like a girdle around the earth. What was that? Religious faith. But today, as I mentioned, what Sophocles heard in that northern sea, I don't hear it anymore. So then what do I do? Remember, he called out to somebody to come and stand by the window and admire the sea. Well, he's talking to the same person again. And I imagine it's his wife. Remember, I mentioned to you, he probably wrote this poem 15 years ago. So he says, "Ah, love, let us be true to one another. For the world, which seems to lie before us like a land of dreams, so various, so beautiful, so new." They're beginning a new life. They're probably just married. There's so much to look forward to. There's so much for us to hope, so much to dream. We have to be true to each other. Because other than that, the world outside, according to him, has neither joy, nor love, nor light, nor certitude, nor peace, nor relief from pain. Oh my God, what a world outside he pains for his new love, maybe for his wife. And how are we, you and me? We have to be true to each other. We have to love each other, he says, because we are confused. We don't know what is outside. So how are we when we have lost our faith? He says, we are like armies who are fighting on a darkling plain. So they don't even know what they are fighting. They are clashing probably in the night. So our life too in this age is probably going to be like that. So what is the hope that we have? That we be true to each other, my love. That's what he says. So the poem ends on that slightly sad note of fighting on a darkling plain, and we don't even know what we are fighting. I hope you understood the poem, my dear students. Not very easy, but then not so tough either. Read it again. Read it more than once. Listen to the lecture again, and I'm sure a lot of it will become clear. The title itself, Dover Beach. Remember, I told you Dover and Calais. Dover is one of the ports closest to France on the English side, and Calais on the other side where he could see the lights. You must go to the website and look at our sample question paper. Read the poem, enjoy the poem, appreciate a critical appreciation of the poem so that you really know that you have understood it. All the best. Happy reading. Enjoy every paper, every text in every paper. All the best.